In May of 2014, several screenshots were posted on the 4chan message board depicting a new game by From Software, including a working title, Project Beast. The images portrayed a cloaked figure battling several villagers in a forest, fearsome beast-like enemies, and the player character wielding a shotgun. Soon after, 4 video clips were also posted, supporting the legitimacy of the earlier screenshots, and sending fans into a craze of speculation.
Whatever happens, you may think it all a mere bad dream.
At E3 2014, Project Beast was revealed under its final name, Bloodborne. The first trailer begins with blood dripping into a vial, followed by a gothic city shrouded in moonlight, filthy streets, a ragged mob, and a cloaked individual tearing through man and monster alike. The trailer ends with the hunter exploring a tomb and a giant beast rising behind him. Bloodborne's inception began as development on DLC for Dark Souls was winding down. Sony approached From Software about collaborating on a new project for their next platform, which would become the PlayStation 4. Excited about the prospect of working on new hardware, From Software gladly accepted. Hidetaka Miyazaki was assigned as director, and development commenced parallel with Dark Souls 2. While Bloodborne doesn't technically share the Souls name, it has the spirit of Dark Souls and Demon Souls. Its gameplay, storytelling, and challenging difficulty instantly feel familiar to any veteran of past Souls titles. It even shares some of the same sound effects. However, Miyazaki wanted it to stand on its own, and while the concept of it being a challenging action RPG like his previous games wouldn't change, Miyazaki wanted to explore different themes, new online elements, and the feeling of fighting for one's life. Gone is the medieval fantasy setting with knights and dragons. Bloodborne places the player in a more gothic Victorian era. Miyazaki wanted to convey an atmosphere similar to Bram Stoker's Dracula, since it fit more closely with the new gameplay ideas, and feelings he wanted to convey like horror, fear, and madness. During Bloodborne's development, From Software was acquired by Japanese publisher Kadokawa, who purchased 80% of the company's stock. From Software was added to the Kadokawa Group, alongside Kadokawa Games. From Software CEO Naotoshi Zin stated, "With a new system, from this point on, I believe we'll be able to make newer and more in-depth games." On May 21, 2014, it was announced that Hidetaka Miyazaki was promoted to president of From Software. This promotion came as part of a large group of personnel changes following the Kadokawa acquisition. Demon Souls producer Masanori Takeuchi was named senior managing director. In an interview with Future Press and the official Bloodborne strategy guide, Miyazaki was asked if being the president of From Software reduced the amount of time he was able to devote to Bloodborne as its director. Miyazaki stated, "Well, to be honest, I'm probably shirking a lot of my presidential duties. Or you could say that everyone around me is humoring me on that front. In terms of percentages though, I'd say it's around 20%. Out of your typical 5-day work week, I'd need to devote a little over a day to that kind of work. Still, it's not as if I was able to devote 100% of my time to directorial duties even before. Once I knew that we'd build the current company structure, I had the director-level staff plan a new production workflow, one that helps support my work when I'm running short on time. So I wouldn't say I'm devoting less time to game design now." On March 24, 2015, Bloodborne was released in North America for the PlayStation 4, garnering both critical and financial success. Players and critics praised the adrenaline-pumping gameplay and spectacular setting. Unfortunately, the game took some criticism for its long load times, inconsistent frame rate, and subpar network code upon release. Still, the positives outweighed the negatives by a very large margin. Bloodborne takes place in the city of Yharnam. Deep below lies an ancient labyrinth carved out by the Pthumerians, superhuman beings that are said to have unlocked the wisdom of the Eldritch Truth. This labyrinth also came to be known as the Tomb of the Gods, when traces of beings named the Great Ones were discovered within. The Great Ones could function on transcendental planes of thought, although not all would transcend, and some were left behind. High above the labyrinth was once the school of Byrgenwerth, a place of higher education. There, Master Willem resided, a man who sought truth through research. While exploring the tombs below, a group of scholars from Byrgenwerth uncovered the chalices, and called the chambers that held them the Chalice Dungeons. The chalices allowed the scholars to reach new areas within the tomb, which eventually led them to find the Old Blood. This blood had great healing properties and seemed of a divine nature. However, it also brought about the discovery of undesirable beasts. After the Old Blood was found, a rift was drawn between Master Willem and one of his students at Byrgenwerth named Lawrence. Lawrence wanted to use this blood not only for its healing properties, he also believed it was the ideal method to transcend humanity by transfusing it into human bodies. Master Willem disagreed with this philosophy and thought the blood was too dangerous to use. Master Willem instead looked to beings from higher planes for guidance, and sought to line his brain with eyes in order to elevate his thoughts. Lawrence and Willem had a falling out. Lawrence left Byrgenwerth but promised to remember Willem's warnings about the dangers of blood. Lawrence went to the city of Yharnam and started the Healing Church. The blood was distributed among the citizens of Yharnam, and the Healing Church rose to great power. People came from all over to consume the blood and heal themselves. It became more intoxicating than alcohol among its patrons. However, those infected with the blood began to transform into beasts. This plague ran rampant throughout the city, and a new branch of the Healing Church emerged: the Hunters. Among them was Gehrman, the first hunter. Working alongside Lawrence, Gehrman founded the Healing Church Workshop, where he trained future hunters and created weapons designed specifically to kill beasts. Eventually, hunters spread to different sections of the church, like the choir and the School of Mensis. The hunters patrolled the streets, either to protect the innocent or conceal the cause of the transformation. Regardless of their reasons, the hunters struck down the beasts with a vengeance. The game starts with the player character in Yharnam attempting to get a blood transfusion. A Bloodminster tells the player that they must first sign a contract and agree to become a hunter. The player then drifts from consciousness, only to be awoken by a beast emerging from a pool of blood and catching fire. As it burns, little messengers surround the player, and they black out again. After reawakening and wandering through the clinic, the player begins to encounter enemies that will likely overpower them. Being killed transfers the player to the hunter's dream. You can teleport there without dying as well. Bloodborne takes many cues from past Souls games, but the most inspiration comes from Demon's Souls, particularly in how it handles its hub, the Hunter's Dream. Like the Nexus, you'll find specific characters in the Hunter's Dream, although only 2 reside here. Gehrman is the keeper of the dream. He helps the player understand the dream and their task. The more important character is the doll. Like the Maiden in Black in Demon's Souls, the player returns to the doll whenever they're ready to level up. In Demon's Souls and Bloodborne, you have to return to the Hunter's Dream to warp between locations. This can occasionally kill the pace since the load times are quite long, although this has been somewhat alleviated by an update that improved loading to a degree. In the Dream, the player can choose from 3 starting weapons and 2 guns. New to Bloodborne are weapon transformations. Each weapon has 2 states that use different movesets. These transformations can be activated mid-attack to allow for more variation. These trick weapons with their jagged edges add to the game's sense of identity, and with fewer options overall, there's a greater investment in each weapon than in earlier games. Guns are also a franchise first. While they can do some damage, it's not advised to solely rely on them. Instead, they serve as a tool to parry enemies and create openings to strike. If the player is in a pinch, blood bullets allow them to sacrifice a bit of health to create ammunition. Bloodborne is a game about fighting for one's life, so aggression is more encouraged than in other Souls games. This is made apparent not only by the lack of shields, but through the rally mechanic. If the player takes damage during battle, they have a short period of time to recover some of their health by slashing at their enemy, almost like they're absorbing the enemy's blood. You primarily regain health with blood vials. Unlike the Estus flask from Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2, blood vials are consumable items that don't automatically refill. They must be bought or found. This can be a slight problem if a player is stuck on a boss and they run out, as they have to grind for more. Thankfully, there are plenty of vials to pick up, and they're relatively cheap. Souls games have always done a good job of tying game mechanics with the lore of the world, and Bloodborne is no exception. Carol runes are transcriptions of inhuman utterings of the Great Ones, and players can equip these runes to gain enhancements like increased stamina or the ability to hold a greater number of blood vials. Bloodborne's level design is most similar to the first Dark Souls. Connected areas with sprawling twists and turns that lead to shortcuts and hidden items, encouraging the player to explore their surroundings. Transitions between these districts are believable, and the game does a great job of rewarding those that go the extra mile. While exploring Hemwick Charnel Lane, Cainhurst Castle can be seen off in the distance in the middle of a lake. This castle can be ignored, but if the player accomplishes the necessary steps, they're rewarded with one of Bloodborne's most fascinating locations.
What a mess you've been caught up in. And tonight of all nights.
The world of Bloodborne is a terrifying place, and its characters are sinister and tragic. Father Gascoigne is a hunter with a wife and 2 daughters. While out on the night of the hunt, he's consumed by his bloodlust and murders his own wife in a fit of rage. He's killed by the player soon after, and his 2 daughters, at home, also meet a cruel fate.
If you find my mum, give her this music box.
Alfred is an executioner of the church that is on a quest to put an end to the Vilebloods.
Let us cleanse these tarnished streets, and may the good blood guide your way.
He has a calm and polite manner until he receives an invitation to the home of the Vilebloods, Cainhurst Castle. Once there, he slays the queen of the Vilebloods and basks in his glory and madness. He then kills himself in order to become a martyr, like his old master. Following these threads often requires the player to take careful note of details along the way, but for those who do, Bloodborne presents many such macabre tales. A big theme in Bloodborne is cosmic horror and how humans deal with inhuman knowledge. This is portrayed in gameplay through insight, which is collected and used to buy items or summon players. Besides acting as a currency, it also affects the world and gameplay. Certain enemies will use different attacks. Winter lanterns can be heard singing off-key at a further distance, and lesser amygdalas become visible in certain areas. The Covenant system in Bloodborne is a bit more streamlined than previous entries. The act of joining one is often the same, where the player speaks to a character and agrees to aid them in their cause. However, you can now change covenants on the fly without returning to the character associated with that covenant. When swearing to a covenant, the player is given an oath rune. Simply equipping this rune automatically designates you as a member of the covenant, and some bestow bonus stats as well. PvP and cooperative play are also different, using various bells to connect to other players. To summon someone into their world, the host must ring the beckoning bell, and joining a host requires a small resonant bell. However, once a beckoning bell is rung, a chime maiden will appear somewhere in the host's world. She will ring her own bell, attempting to summon hostile players, but she can be killed to cancel the invasion. In order to invade a player's world, a sinister resonant bell must be rung by the invader. The player can then be summoned into a host's world, as long as the chime maiden is alive. While most of the campaign of Bloodborne takes place in Yharnam and its surrounding areas, the Chalice dungeons below let players endure numerous challenges alone or with companions. New foes, bosses, items, and even new weapons are found only in these dungeons. To access them, a Chalice ritual must be executed in the Hunter's Dream. Performing a ritual requires specific items like ritual blood and tomb mold. Many of these dungeons are procedurally generated, but they can be shared online for other players to try. They add some longevity to the game, but as many share similar structures, exploring them can become quite tedious. After defeating a number of beasts and other nightmares, the player returns to the Hunter's Dream, only to be welcomed by Flame. The doll instructs the player to find Gehrman, and when confronted, Gehrman tells the player they've done well, and the night is near its end. The player has to make a choice leading to one of 3 endings: leave the dream, become the new master of the dream, or become a great one. As in previous Souls games, after the credits roll, New Game Plus becomes available.
Feeds their children too, and their children forever true.
At their press conference before the 2015 Tokyo Game Show, Sony showed off a trailer for Bloodborne's expansion, titled The Old Hunters. In an interview with Eurogamer, Sony Japan's producer for Bloodborne, Masaki Yamigawa, said that there were originally going to be 2 separate pieces of DLC for Bloodborne, but the team decided to combine them both into one large expansion. In preparation, a patch added new items, characters, and a brand new covenant. And on November 24th, The Old Hunters was released. The Old Hunters takes place in the Nightmare, a realm where hunters are taken when they become drunk with blood. Here, they're destined to wander forever, engaged in an endless hunt, a fate no hunter can escape. Within this nightmare lie secrets of old, sins committed by scholars of Byrgenwerth long ago. To reach the expansion, the player must first defeat Vicar Amelia and pick up the Eye of the Blood-Drunk Hunter and the Old Hunter Bell. With both of these items, the player must return to the Amygdala outside the Cathedral Ward and allow themselves to be carried into the nightmare. The Old Hunters rivals Artorias of the Abyss from the first Dark Souls. Its locations are more sinister and bone-chilling than previous settings, lingering in memory long after. New weapons like the Whirligig Saw and Rakuyo are a joy to use, and boss battles like Lady Maria and Ludwig are some of the most heart-pounding and satisfying encounters in the game. The story it tells is a meaningful, self-contained tragedy that successfully elevates the mythos.
Does the nightmare never end?
Bloodborne took the foundation set before it and forged its own path. Its faster pace of combat and gothic horror setting differentiated from its predecessors, and strong support from Sony helped this unpredictable franchise reach a broad new audience. Although Miyazaki had left Dark Souls to work on Bloodborne, there was still more to tell. He wanted to return to his most famous franchise and end Dark Souls as we know it. The Souls Retrospective is made possible by the support of our generous patrons. To learn more about Easy Allies and how you can get involved, head to patreon.com/easyallies. Any amount will help us to produce more retrospectives and further our goals. You can also follow @Easy Allies on Twitter for the latest updates on when to expect Part 5.